We are told from an early age that life follows a clear, upward trajectory. Study hard, build a career, find love, achieve success, settle down, and everything will fall into place. The promise is implicit but powerful, that fulfillment will come early, that our 20s and 30s are the stage for living fully, and that after that, it is all downhill, or at least a slow descent into routine.
This belief is so deeply woven into the fabric of modern culture that we rarely question it, until we arrive in our late 30s or early 40s and find ourselves unfulfilled, confused, or even empty. The disillusionment comes quietly. Despite achieving many of the things we were told to aim for, something feels amiss. The dreams realized don't taste as sweet as expected. The career we built becomes a burden. The relationships we formed are more complex than fairy tales promised. And the sense of aliveness we were chasing often seems more distant than ever. This is not a failure. It is a threshold. This is where real life begins. Our culture is obsessed with youth. We glorify the prodigy, the young millionaire, the early success. Life is seen as a race, and the fastest are rewarded with status and admiration. We internalize this pressure early. We must find our calling by 25, achieve something significant by 30, and have it all figured out by 35. There is little room for exploration, for wandering, for depth. Only speed and visibility seem to matter. But life is not a sprint. It is not even a linear path. It is more like a spiral, circling inward towards something more essential with each turn. What we call a midlife crisis is often just the moment we realize we were climbing a ladder that was leaning against the wrong wall. At this point, many people begin to ask dangerous questions. What do I really want? Who am I beyond my titles and roles? What if I don't want what I thought I wanted? These are not signs of collapse, but of awakening. There is a unique kind of suffering that arises around midlife. It is not the raw pain of youth, full of confusion and passion. It is quieter, heavier, more existential. It manifests as restlessness, numbness, or a vague sense that life is passing by without true engagement. This suffering is often misunderstood and medicated with busyness, consumption, distraction. But if we dare to sit with it, we discover that it is not depression or failure. It is the soul demanding our attention. It is the beginning of a deeper dialogue with life. In the first half of life, we are busy building a structure, identity, status, stability. In the second half, we are called to inhabit that structure with depth and meaning. The false beginning is necessary, in a way, because it gives us something to deconstruct. It shows us that outer success is not enough. The true awakening begins when we stop living from the outside in and start living from the inside out. Before 40, much of life is driven by survival, not just physical survival, but psychological and social. We strive to be accepted, to be admired, to belong. We adapt to the expectations of our family, society, and peers. We play roles to fit in and avoid rejection. This is natural, but it is also exhausting. At some point, often in our 40s, the exhaustion becomes unbearable. We can no longer maintain the personas that once protected us. We begin to long for authenticity more than acceptance. We want to live our truth, even if it means disappointing others. This is the shift from survival to meaning. It is here that we encounter the paradox. The more we let go of who we think we should be, the more we become who we truly are. And with that authenticity comes a new kind of freedom, not the reckless freedom of youth, but the grounded freedom of someone who knows their own soul. There is a strange and beautiful moment in middle life when we realize we have never truly met ourselves. We have been busy performing, achieving, chasing, avoiding, but not truly being. And then one day, the mirror becomes clearer. We begin to see past the layers. We hear a quieter voice within, one that has always been there, waiting. This is the beginning of an inner life, not in opposition to the outer world, but as its foundation. We start asking different questions. What brings me peace? What feels honest? What do I value beyond what others value? We are no longer seduced by applause. We seek resonance. This meeting with the self is not always pleasant. It involves grief, for time lost, for choices made from fear, for parts of ourselves abandoned along the way. But it is also deeply healing, because for the first time, we are no longer trying to be someone else. We are becoming ourselves. The phrase "life begins at 40" is not just a cultural cliche. It is a psychological in spirit. For much of our early lives, the word should governs our decisions. We are taught, both explicitly and implicitly, that life is a series of obligations, expectations, and externally defined milestones. We should get good grades, we should find a respectable job, we should get married, we should have children, we should be productive, polite, agreeable. We should be successful. We should be happy, or at least pretend to be. But who decides what we should be? And what happens when the script we've been following no longer resonates with who we are becoming? This chapter is about the shift from a life built on obligations to one rooted in authenticity. It is about the quiet rebellion that begins not with defiance, but with deep questioning. It is the moment we stop asking, "What do they expect of me?" and begin to ask, "What do I truly want?" Should is a subtle tyrant. It wears many disguises: duty, ambition, morality, tradition, and often masquerades as love or responsibility. But its power lies in its ability to silence our inner voice. Every time we obey a should, without reflection, we disconnect from our own desires. We betray ourselves, often without even realizing it. The first half of life is often a performance. We act out roles given to us by family, culture, religion, and media. These roles are not inherently bad. They provide structure and identity, but they are borrowed, not chosen. We inherit ideas about what success looks like, what a good life entails, how we ought to behave. And in trying to fit into those molds, we often lose touch with the parts of ourselves that don't conform. We begin to wear masks so often that we forget we're wearing them. We say yes when we mean no. We pursue goals we don't truly value. We stay in relationships, jobs, and lifestyles that drain us, simply because we feel we must. This dissonance builds quietly, until one day, it can no longer be ignored. Around midlife, something shifts. For many, it's triggered by a crisis, the loss of a loved one, a career collapse, a divorce, a health scare. But it doesn't have to be dramatic. Sometimes it's a subtle but persistent feeling. I can't keep living like this. Something inside begins to stir, a longing, a question, a refusal. This is the awakening of want. Not impulsive desire or superficial craving, but the deep, authentic yearning that has been buried under years of conditioning. It's the soul trying to speak. At first, this awakening can feel destabilizing. If we no longer believe in the roles we've played, who are we? If we stop chasing the things we were told to want, what do we pursue instead? The answers are not immediate, but the questions themselves are liberating. They signal the beginning of a new relationship with the self, one based not on performance, but on presence. Liberation from imposed roles is not a one-time event. It is a slow, often painful process of shedding. We begin to recognize the masks we wear: the competent professional, the agreeable spouse, the reliable parent, the selfless friend. And we ask ourselves, is this me? Or is this who I've been trained to be? Letting go of roles can be terrifying. These roles have given us identity, belonging, even love. But they have also limited us. They have demanded conformity at the expense of authenticity. To shed a role is not to reject responsibility. It is to reclaim authorship. It is to say, I will no longer live by a script I did not write. I will no longer sacrifice my truth for approval. I will no longer betray myself to belong. This doesn't mean abandoning commitments or relationships. It means showing up in them more honestly. It means saying no when we mean no, even if it disappoints others. It means admitting when we're not okay, even if it breaks the image we've carefully constructed. It means prioritizing inner alignment over external validation. As we begin to shed the old roles, we are left with a space, sometimes frightening, always fertile. This is where we start to write our own script, not based on what we should do, but on what resonates with our deeper truth. This process is deeply personal. For some, it may involve changing careers, leaving relationships, or moving to a new place. For others, it might be internal, a new way of relating to themselves, a quieter rhythm, a gentler self-dialogue. Rewriting the script is not about radical reinvention. It's about remembering. We begin to reclaim parts of ourselves that were silenced. The artist, the dreamer, the adventurer, the contemplative. We begin to live in a way that feels congruent, where our outer life reflects our inner values. This is not always easy. The world may resist our changes. Loved ones may be confused or even hurt. But the cost of inauthenticity is far greater than the discomfort of change. To live a life that is not ours is to slowly disappear. To reclaim our voice, even if it trembles, is to begin truly living. One of the paradoxes of this transformation is that, in choosing what we want over what we should, we become more responsible, not less. We stop acting out of guilt or fear, and start acting out of integrity. Our choices become more deliberate, our relationships more honest, our presence more grounded. Authenticity is not loud. It doesn't need to shout or prove. It simply is. It radiates a quiet confidence, a sense of wholeness. When we are aligned with our truth, we no longer seek permission to exist. We know we belong, not because we conform, but because we are real. This is the liberation that comes with age. Not the freedom to do whatever we want, but the freedom to be who we are. To say yes to what nourishes us, and no to what diminishes us. To trust our own rhythm, even if it goes against the current. Ultimately, the journey from should to want is a journey from obedience to sovereignty. It is the transition from being a character in someone else's story to becoming the author of our own. It is a return to self, not as a fixed identity, but as a living, evolving presence. Sovereignty is not selfishness. It is self-possession. It is the ability to stand in our own truth, to make choices from a place of clarity and courage. It is the recognition that we are responsible for our own joy, our own peace, our own becoming. And it is in this sovereignty that life begins to feel deeply, unmistakably real. We are no longer acting. We are living. For much of our early life, our attention is directed outward. We are taught to seek validation, success, love, and identity from sources outside of ourselves, through achievements, appearances, approval, and accolades. This orientation toward the external world shapes our ambitions, our self-worth, and even our sense of reality. We measure who we are by how others see us. We chase dreams that are more often reflections of collective ideals than authentic desires. We strive to be visible, admired, accepted. But somewhere around midlife, the axis begins to tilt. What once energized us now feels empty. The applause grows quiet, or perhaps we no longer crave it. The things we once pursued with such intensity, the promotions, the possessions, the praise, start to lose their allure. And in that quieting, something ancient within us begins to stir, the yearning to turn inward. In the first half of life, we often live by an external compass. This compass is formed by parents, teachers, peers, media, and culture at large. It tells us what is valuable, what is worthy, what is admirable. It gives us a sense of direction, but not necessarily one that is aligned with our inner truth. This external orientation is not inherently wrong. It serves a purpose. It helps us form identity, belong to a community, and develop a place in society. But if we do not eventually question this compass, we risk living a life that is not truly ours. We risk becoming strangers to ourselves. There comes a moment, sometimes sudden, sometimes gradual, when we realize that the map we've been following does not lead to fulfillment. We've reached the destination, only to find it lacking. This moment of reckoning is painful, but it is also sacred. It is the invitation to find a new compass, one that points inward. Turning inward is not a rejection of the outer world, but a reorientation of focus. It means shifting the source of meaning from outside validation to inner resonance. It means beginning to ask different questions, not what should I do to be successful, but what feels true to me. Not how do I look to others, but how do I feel within myself. This shift often comes with a sense of disillusionment. The symbols of success lose their magic. The social roles we once performed with pride start to feel performative. The conversations we used to enjoy seem shallow. This is not depression. It is the soul awakening to its deeper needs. To look inward is to begin the work of inner alignment. It requires courage to face the parts of ourselves we've ignored, to sit with silence, to explore emotions we've suppressed. But it is in this inward gaze that we begin to find authenticity, meaning, and peace. One of the most profound aspects of this inward shift is the development of inner authority. No longer do we rely solely on external opinions to determine our path. We begin to listen to our intuition, our values, our embodied wisdom. Inner authority does not mean we stop listening to others. It means we stop outsourcing our truth. We learn to trust ourselves. We become less reactive and more reflective. We stop living to meet expectations and begin living to express who we truly are. This process is not linear. There are setbacks, doubts, and moments of regression. But over time, the voice within becomes clearer. We become less afraid of solitude and more attuned to its gifts. We start to distinguish between noise and signal, between what is urgent and what is essential. As we journey inward, we discover that we are not as simple as the roles we've played. Beneath the surface of our persona lies a vast and intricate landscape, full of memories, wounds, dreams, and untapped potential. We encounter our shadow, the parts of ourselves we've disowned, and we learn to bring them into the light with compassion. We also reconnect with our essence, the part of us that is not defined by accomplishments or appearance. This essence is quiet but powerful. It is the part of us that remains constant amid the changes. It is our inner sanctuary, our true home. This inner journey often brings a new sense of spirituality, not necessarily in a religious sense, but in a deeply personal one. We begin to feel the sacredness of ordinary moments, the interconnectedness of all things, the mystery that permeates existence. We find solace in being rather than doing, in presence rather than productivity. One of the major transformations that occurs during the shift inward is a redefinition of success. No longer is success measured by wealth, status, or recognition. Instead, it is measured by integrity, presence, and depth. We begin to ask, am I living in alignment with my values? Do my actions reflect my inner truth? Am I at peace with myself? This reimagining of success often leads to a simplification of life. We let go of what no longer serves us. We declutter not just our homes, but our schedules, relationships, and commitments. We choose quality over quantity, essence over image. This is not a retreat from the world, but a return to it with new eyes. We engage with life not from a place of striving, but from a place of centeredness. We act not to prove, but to express. We contribute not to impress, but to serve. As the outward pursuit slows, a new richness begins to emerge, one that is not visible to the outside world but deeply felt. This richness comes from self-understanding, emotional maturity, spiritual connection. It manifests in the ability to be present, to listen deeply, to experience joy in small things. We begin to notice the nuances of life, the texture of silence, the beauty of imperfection, the subtle rhythms of nature and human interaction. We become more attuned to our own needs and more empathetic toward others. We stop rushing. We start being. This inner richness is the true treasure of the second half of life. It cannot be bought or earned. It can only be cultivated through presence, reflection, and a willingness to grow. When we live outwardly, we use others as mirrors. We judge our worth by their reactions. But as we turn inward, we begin to see others not as mirrors, but as windows, openings to deeper connection, mutual understanding, and shared humanity. This change in perception softens us. We become less judgmental, more curious. We are no longer threatened by differences. We listen more than we speak. We seek to understand rather than to be understood. In this way, the inner journey transforms our outer relationships. The ultimate goal of the inward turn is not to reject the outer world, but to integrate it with our inner truth. We learn to move through the world with authenticity. Our actions reflect our values. Our presence becomes a gift. Our life becomes a reflection of our soul. This integration brings a profound sense of peace. We are no longer torn between who we are and who we pretend to be. We no longer live in tension with ourselves. We inhabit our lives fully from the inside out. This is the gift of midlife. Not a decline, but a descent into depth, into wholeness, into being. It is the moment we stop searching for ourselves in the eyes of others and finally find ourselves within. And in that finding, we begin to truly live. There is a kind of knowledge that cannot be taught, only lived. It does not come from books, schools, or mentors, but from time, trial, and the countless subtleties of real life. This is the wisdom of lived experience, the deep knowing that arises not from theory, but from having moved through the world with open eyes and an open heart. It is not the certainty of youth, but the quiet clarity of one who has seen enough to understand the limits of certainty. In a culture that often idolizes youth, speed, and surface-level success, the slow, steady growth of wisdom is undervalued. Yet it is only with time, and the humility that time brings, that we begin to see life for what it truly is. Not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. Knowledge is information, facts, data, instructions. It is accessible, transmissible, and often immediate. But wisdom is transformation. It is the integration of knowledge with experience, emotion, failure, and reflection. It cannot be rushed. It ripens with time. Wisdom understands the complexity beneath simplicity. Where knowledge says, "This is how things are," wisdom replies, "It depends." Where knowledge seeks answers, wisdom embraces questions. It is less concerned with being right and more devoted to being real. We often begin life seeking knowledge, to learn, achieve, and excel. But over time, if we are paying attention, we begin to seek wisdom, to understand, to accept, to live well. This shift is one of the central blessings of aging. Real wisdom is earned. It comes from heartbreak, loss, disappointment, and failure as much as, or more than, from success. We learn not just through what we achieve, but through what we survive. Each difficult moment, each painful decision, Each unexpected detour becomes part of a larger unfolding. We begin to see that life is not linear, that growth often comes through messiness, uncertainty, and contradiction. The education of experience is slow, personal, and often painful, but it is also profound. In youth, we often seek to avoid pain. As we age, we begin to recognize its role as teacher. We understand that suffering is not the end of meaning, but often the beginning. We learn to sit with discomfort, to let go of control, to find value even in the broken pieces. One of the gifts of age is perspective. With time, patterns become visible. We begin to see recurring themes in our lives, the same fears, the same dynamics, the same longings. We learn to recognize our own stories, and in doing so, gain some measure of freedom from them. Wisdom is often less about new ideas than about seeing old ideas more clearly. We realize that many of our assumptions were inherited, many of our habits reactive, many of our beliefs unexamined. With perspective, we gain the ability to pause, to reflect, to choose differently. We also begin to understand the impermanence of all things. The things that once felt so important, appearances, accolades, opinions, begin to lose their grip. We become more grounded, less reactive, more at peace with not knowing. With wisdom comes a tolerance for paradox. We stop needing everything to make perfect sense. We begin to see that life is both joy and sorrow, gain and loss, light and shadow. We become less rigid in our thinking, more open to contradiction, more accepting of complexity. We learn that strength can be found in vulnerability, that courage often looks like surrender, that wisdom often speaks in silence. We stop labeling experiences as good or bad and begin to ask, what is this moment teaching me? How can I grow from this? In youth, we want answers. In maturity, we want meaning. And meaning often arises not from clarity, but from the ability to hold opposites, to say yes to the full spectrum of experience. One of the deepest expressions of wisdom is emotional maturity. This is not the absence of emotion, but the ability to feel without being overwhelmed, to respond without reacting, to hold space for others without losing oneself. Emotional maturity allows us to see others more clearly. We recognize that most people act from their own wounds, fears, and conditioning. This doesn't excuse harm, but it helps us respond with compassion rather than resentment. We no longer take everything personally. We no longer need to win every argument or prove our worth. We also begin to show ourselves the same compassion. We forgive ourselves for past mistakes. We stop striving to be perfect. We begin to honor our limits, listen to our needs, and treat ourselves with gentleness. The quiet confidence of wisdom. True wisdom is humble. It does not announce itself or demand attention. It does not seek validation. It simply is a presence, a way of being. People with wisdom often speak less and listen more. They do not rush to offer advice, but when they speak, their words carry weight. They are not concerned with appearances, but with integrity. They are not driven by ego, but guided by conscience. This quiet confidence comes from having walked through fire and emerged whole, from having made mistakes and learned from them, from having faced fears and survived. It is not about having all the answers, but about trusting the process. Wisdom longs to be shared, but not imposed. One of the challenges of maturing is learning how to offer insight without preaching, to guide without controlling. We come to understand that people learn in their own time, through their own experiences. Just as we needed to stumble to grow, so too do others. Wisdom respects the journey. It knows when to speak and when to stay silent. It offers presence, not prescriptions. This kind of guidance is subtle but powerful. A story shared at the right moment. A question that opens a door. A steady presence in the midst of chaos. This is how wisdom moves, not through dominance, but through resonance. As we grow in wisdom, we often find ourselves reinterpreting the past. Events that once seemed senseless begin to reveal their shape. We start to see how each chapter, even the painful ones, contributed to who we are becoming. This doesn't mean we romanticize suffering or deny injustice, but it does mean we begin to trust in life's larger rhythm. We start to see ourselves not as victims, but as participants in a sacred unfolding. We begin to make peace with our story. Forgiveness becomes easier, not because the past changes, but because our relationship to it does. We stop clinging to what might have been and begin to honor what is. We recognize that everything, the joys, the losses, the detours, has brought us here, to this moment of deeper knowing. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of wisdom is that it naturally becomes service. We want to give back, not out of obligation, but out of gratitude. We want to use what we've learned to ease the path for others. This service can take many forms: mentoring, creating, parenting, teaching, simply being present. It is less about doing and more about being, about showing up with sincerity, integrity, and love. The wise do not need recognition. Their fulfillment comes from knowing they are contributing to something larger than themselves, to the healing, awakening, and deepening of the world. Wisdom is not a destination, but a process. It does not arrive all at once, but in glimpses and moments. It is cultivated slowly, through years of living, reflecting, loving, losing, falling, and rising again. It is the gift of time, not time measured in years, but in depth, in attention, in presence, in humility. And the more we live, the more we come to see. The true markers of a meaningful life are not fame or fortune, but wisdom, compassion, presence, and love. These are the treasures we carry with us, long after the applause has faded and the world has moved on. In the end, wisdom is not about knowing more, but about being more whole, more grounded, more human. And this, perhaps, is what it truly means to grow older, to become, at last, fully alive. There is a moment, quiet but seismic, when we truly begin to understand that our time is finite. It may come gradually, in the gray that creeps into our hair, in the slowing of recovery after illness, in the passing of parents and mentors, or it may arrive suddenly in a diagnosis, a loss, or a near miss. Regardless of how it comes, the recognition leaves a mark. Life is not endless. Our time is not infinite, and we are not immune to the passage of time. This confrontation with finitude is not morbid. It is clarifying. For the first time, we see with unclouded eyes what has always been true, that we are temporary, and that this temporariness gives life its weight, its urgency, and its beauty. In the first half of life, time is expansive. We believe there will always be more chances, more years, more beginnings. But after 40, the horizon draws closer. The illusion of endless tomorrows begins to dissolve. In youth, we live as if we are untouchable. The future stretches out indefinitely. Death, aging, and decline are distant shadows. Our goals are long-term, our plans far-reaching. We postpone our dreams, telling ourselves there will be time, later, someday, eventually. This illusion of timelessness is not foolish. It is natural. It is the innocence that allows us to build, explore, and take risks. But it is also a veil, and when that veil lifts, whether through age, loss, or awakening, we are faced with the profound question: what will I do with the time I have left? To awaken to our mortality is to awaken to life. Not in theory, but in practice. When we internalize the truth that we will not live forever, everything changes. Our priorities shift. The noise of the world quiets. We begin to hear a different kind of call, not to do more, but to live more meaningfully. This awareness often brings grief for time wasted, for paths not taken, for youth slipping away. But beneath the grief lies a gift, presence. Suddenly, the ordinary becomes sacred. The familiar becomes precious. Each sunrise, each conversation, each breath carries a weight it never had before. With the awareness of finitude comes a renewed relationship with the present. We stop racing toward the future. We begin to notice, really notice, the texture of life as it unfolds. This does not mean we abandon ambition or cease planning. It means we stop living as if we are waiting for life to begin. We understand that life is now, in this moment, in this body, in this breath. We stop deferring joy. We start seeking depth. We also become more discerning. We begin to ask, what is worth my time? What brings me alive? What drains me? What have I been tolerating that no longer fits the person I am becoming? Many of our early pursuits are what philosopher Ernest Becker called immortality projects. Attempts to outweed death by leaving a legacy, making a mark, being remembered. These projects are not inherently bad, but they often lead us to live for appearances rather than essence. As we confront finitude, we begin to release the need to be extraordinary. We stop chasing immortality and begin seeking authenticity. We understand that impact is not measured in scale, but in sincerity. That a kind word can matter as much as a great achievement. That living fully is more important than being remembered forever. Aging itself becomes a spiritual teacher. It teaches us to let go of roles, of illusions, of control. It teaches us humility, that no matter how strong or smart we are, we too will fade. And it teaches us gratitude for health, for relationships, for each day we are given. The body becomes a mirror, reflecting the passage of time. Wrinkles, aches, changes, all reminders that we are embodied beings tethered to time. Yet there is beauty in this vulnerability. As the body softens, the spirit often strengthens. We become more compassionate, more accepting, more real. The awareness of death can provoke fear, fear of pain, of loss, of non-existence. But if we face this fear rather than flee from it, something remarkable happens. It begins to lose its power. We realize that the fear of death is often the fear of not having lived. And so we begin to live. Not recklessly, but intentionally. We speak truths we've held back. We pursue passions we've delayed. We say no to what drains us and yes to what delights us. We forgive more freely. We love more deeply. We become, paradoxically, more alive because we know we are dying. There is wisdom in limitation. Limits force us to choose. When we believed we had forever, we could afford to be indiscriminate. But now, with time felt as finite, we must prioritize. We must ask ourselves what truly matters. This narrowing is not constriction but focus. It sharpens our sense of purpose. It frees us from the tyranny of shoulds. It allows us to invest more fully in what we love, because we understand that we will not always be able to. Time, once a backdrop, becomes a sacred frame. Within its boundaries, our lives take shape, not infinite, but meaningful precisely because of their impermanence. To live well is to prepare to die well, not in fear, but in peace. This means living in such a way that, when the end comes, we are not filled with regret. It means cultivating presence, integrity, connection, and love, so that when we look back, we can say, I was here, I lived, I mattered. This peace is not passive. It is active engagement with the reality of time. It is saying yes to life in all its phases, youth and age, joy and sorrow, beginnings and endings. Many spiritual traditions speak of death not as an enemy, but as a guide, a reminder to live fully, love fiercely, and let go gracefully. When we befriend death, we no longer fear it. We begin to live in alignment with our soul, not our ego. Facing our finitude often shifts our understanding of legacy. We realize that legacy is not just what we leave behind, but what we embody now. It is the energy we bring to our relationships, the integrity with which we live, the presence we offer each moment. Legacy is not measured in monuments, but in moments, in how we treat others, in how we respond to suffering, in how we show up when it counts. It is not something we build for the future, but something we live into now. In the end, time itself becomes our teacher. It teaches us to cherish what we have, to let go of what we cannot keep, and to trust in the rhythm of life. It teaches us that nothing lasts, and that this is what makes everything precious. Finitude is not a flaw in the design. It is the design. And when we stop resisting this truth, we begin to live not in fear of time, but in partnership with it. We begin to see time not as a thief, but as a sculptor, shaping us into who we are meant to become. This is the first true meeting with time, not as a calendar or a clock, but as the living breath of our existence. And in this meeting, we find not despair, but depth, not panic, but presence, not defeat, but devotion. We begin, at last, to live with the urgency of love and the grace of one who knows. This life is not forever, and that is what makes it sacred.